So this is the picture in the financial crimes of 6th August, 7th August, that is Sunday, Saturday and Sunday edition, that is the weekend edition, published on the Saturday. The picture is an illustration. It's a drawing of Nazanin, and it is based on a piece, it is accompanying a piece written by the editor of the Financial Crimes, the Lebanese-born mental slave ethnic surrogate called Rola Khalaf. Rola Khalaf is one of the instruments of propaganda, moral propaganda and ethical and intellectual propaganda, undermining essentially the basic core of Muslim culture and Muslim countries. Rola Khalaf is also a part of the wider ethnic surrogacy employed by the brainwashers and the brain drainers in the West. And this piece about Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe being detained by the Iranian regime for 6 years is part of the diplomatic propaganda kind of agenda narrative that is intended to undermine the objectively verifiable kind of claims and rights of the regimes that are controlled by Muslims, not necessarily like the Islamic Republic of Iran, but this is the idea. So what I'm looking for in this piece, and I've been looking for it for the information or the assertion or the occurrence or the evidence of any reference, objectively verifiable reference by Rola Khalaf to the main organs of the so-called UK state. For example, the judiciary, the official parliament, the executive. And I haven't found any systematic references to those, and I have not found any kind of spontaneous emotional references either. And this is very telling because the financial crimes is based on the pretension. There is neither the kind of paper that Rupert Murdoch and his scum publish, nor Rothermere's Daily Mail group, nor is it affiliated to any established political party. Despite these pretentious appearances and suggestions and hints throughout their editorial writing style, the house style so-called, the financial crimes is as dishonest and as corrupt. And in the context of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, as racist. Although born and brought up in Iran, a Muslim, Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe is not in any way, shape, or form representative of the Muslim women, generally the Muslim women, Muslim young women in Iran, nor in the counterpart communities across the rest of the Middle East. Yet there is this hostility or the hostile perception pervade about Iran and Iranian people in the Western media. I mean, this was not helped. That is to say, when Ayatollah Khomeini announced his so-called reward for the capture and murder of Sayyid Rushdie, that was a gift for the Western anti-Muslim media establishments. Absolutely kind of expected. And even without that kind of opportunity, Muslims gave to the anti-Muslim power structures across the West a very rare and very truthful pretext and excuse with which to condemn the Muslims everywhere. Now, I have sought in the years that have followed, let's say the 30 plus years since Ayatollah Khomeini's fatwa against Sayyid Rushdie, and I have not found, there may exist beyond my reach, but I have not found empirically wherever I have been any discussion, any evaluation, any actual examination, point by point, of the points that were implied by Ayatollah Khomeini. And I have not found any connection between the burning of that particular kind of single copy of the quote book by Sayyid Rushdie in Bradford and any spark, the impetus that burning apparently gave to the Iranian Khomeini, Ayatollah Khomeini, to actually condemn Sayyid Rushdie to the point of sentencing him to death. I have not found either an analysis of the whole so-called Muslim world, Sunnah, Shia, and others. And the lack of such analysis by Muslims independently is not an isolated lack. It is actually part of the consistent pattern of the so-called Muslim world intellectually as being non-existent. It is a hypothesis. It is a fantasy that is promoted as a Muslim world in slogans. But Muslim world intellectually does not exist, not as a coherent, comprehensive, ethically combative response or answer or counter to the anti-Muslim inciters at every level across the West. So when this piece is written and published by the Financial Crimes about Nazanin Zaharia Ratcliffe, it is done as part of the Malala Yousafzai kind of thing. Of course, Malala Yousafzai nearly died from the physical attacks that she suffered as a child, whereas Nazanin has not been physically injured in that quite the same way, but emotionally and psychologically she has been. And the main reason for both these women being given the kind of prominence that they are given by the West, of course, Malala Yousafzai has been given way disproportionately high frequency and level and intensity of propaganda platforms that will never be given to Nazanin by anyone, either in the UK or in the West, the rest of the West. So they're using Nazanin here as a kind of quiet, and it's kind of quiet and almost self-effacing kind of icon of resistance to the Iranians. And it doesn't deal with any of the real crimes of the West, the crimes of anti-Muslim incitement and hatred and misinformation, suppression and denial and persecution that have been going on for centuries against the Muslims. Well, the Muslims, in this context, historically long context, is, of course, the collection of Muslims dating back to the Crusades. So the Crusades have not ended, they have not stopped. And so therefore the empires have not stopped. And so what should have been happening and hasn't happened is the real discussion, fact-based, objectively fact-based and factually researched diagnosis of the facts and the impact of the detention and treatment of Nazanin Zacharie Ratcliffe, and the attacks, repeated attacks by the Christians, the fanatic Christians, not the ordinary people who are kind of just of the Christian faith, but the people who control the Christian propaganda and information and mythology and myths making. They mounted repeated assaults every century for several centuries to destroy the Muslims having any control over their state or developing the Muslim states, etc., etc. So I have not seen any of that. Does not mean that it has not been written. It probably has been. But I have not seen it. So without seeing it, I have to say that that kind of analysis must be written and created and made available. Suffice to say that I'm not at all impressed by the pretentiousness and the dishonesty of Rawla Khalaf. She has already, not on this one, but when she was reportedly featured in the Israeli manufactured and Israeli kind of marketed spying software, is it Pegasus? I mean, she made an outstanding, outrageous kind of claim on behalf of the financial crimes. Let me say that I have known the financial crimes contents for decades. It's not justified. The blame, the boast is not justified, nor is the cover price. That's the Saturday's paper. I had to pay £4.50 in London or in the UK for Saturday's edition of the Financial Crimes. If I didn't, I would not be able to read the whole article because the article is not available online. Well, it may be now, but it wasn't in the last 48 hours, to my knowledge. And the piece is written with the pretentious avoidance of the people of both Iran, the ordinary people, and the people of the region generally, and the criminal abuse of power that goes on in the Soviet style control exercised on the people by so many Muslim little states. So we shall be combining that with the existence of the absence, of the emptiness of the Muslim political analysis in the rest of the world, taking into account the rest of the world, literally the whole of the rest of the world. Now, we have one item that is going through the news headlines overnight, and it will become expanded, I think, as the time moves, about the plan, according to this report by Dominic Raab, who is the kind of token minister in the UK department department kept in the name of justice, the justice minister. If there is any absurdity about that claim that there is a thing called justice ministry, or there is an absurdity about the naming of a particular department, executive department of the United Kingdom executive, that together makes up the quote government, then this one must take the cake, if you like, because there is no justice. I mean, to say that this is a justice ministry or Ministry of Justice is completely stupid, because there is no justice anywhere in the operation of the bureaucracy, the judicial bureaucracy. The judicial bureaucracy in the UK is an unjust bureaucracy that is aiding and abetting and perpetuating the unjust agenda of the state. Going back to the Channel 4 slot broadcast that I made in January 1992 about the hunger and starvation being addressed in the countries of origin of the people desperately seeking asylum, etc., in the West. The indifference by the West has not changed, and my clear, practical program has not been implemented. And so the result is that although the program is there, it is not being implemented. And any number of people that are dying and whose lives are being destroyed as a result of the programs that were contained in my questions put to John Major in that particular slot. I mean, that is something that no media has actually mentioned. No media has mentioned, and nor has the kind of issue, the analysis that has been in place since January 1992. Yet, of all the opinions and comments, etc., that the various printed newspapers, so-called Fleet Street, have published about poverty, about hunger, about starvation, about the huge numbers of people being caught in the trap of poverty and denial of rights and denial of justice. All of these people are being denied by the Fleet Street and the British media. And of course, they are being denied by the British mainstream, such as the platform that carried the piece that I wrote. But it didn't give me the direct personnel identification as the person who presented the program on the slot. I'll probably expect a cup of tea or something shortly, but if I don't, I'll still continue. What is happening in the election propaganda between Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak is, as I suspected, the reality that Sunak is making kind of progress in terms of persuading the so-called grassroots Muslims. But he's not anywhere near the spot where he should be in order to beat Liz Truss. But that is something that he and his team have to work out on, and how to dislodge Truss and to put the person in charge in the name as presenter. Because what we are looking at in the situation as it obtains in Pakistan, for example, I mean, this is less than 48 hours, but whatever the length of time between what we are doing now and any of the incidents that happened or will happen, is that in the history of 75 years since Pakistan was, quote, created out of the Mughal Empire that was subjugated by the British for 170 years. This is something that is happening for the first time in Pakistan or in any part of the subcontinent over 75 years. Don't talk to me. I told you I'm busy.
Okay, sorry.
So I'm going to shut the door. So what is happening for the first time in 75 years since August 1947 in the subcontinent is that this basic question is being put to the public, to the people of the country or countries. Pakistan ka matlab kya. That is what Imran Khan's slogan is. And I say, extending that to the question of 1971 and Bangladesh. What was the purpose of Bangladesh? That is to say, what was the purpose that was going to be fulfilled by, quote, having a liberated, free Bangladesh? And it follows the purpose of India, because today, 7th of August, Indians have been celebrating the pride of India. Well, it's more or less the same. In the case of Pakistan and India, it's the same. Bangladesh, I have yet to notice anything happening along the same lines, but it is those 75 years. And I'm correct to say that we got it right when I started reviewing the mainly South India movies and introducing that review as contextual. And it is absolutely overdue that contextual assessment must happen. 75 years. That assessment, I mean, in India, I mean, I shall be looking at the Indian media outlets, but I don't expect that they will be telling the truth. What they're doing is that they are actually kind of doing the childish kind of dancing in the street like the fanatics, Like, what's his name? Amitabh Bachchan and some others. Where are the featured? Let's see if we can find the actual name of the slogan, the actual content, the text of the slogan. Yes, this is what the actual slogan in Hindi, as they are putting it, is in India. Celebrate Azadi ke Garb ka Mahaparv. And they're doing this by linking it to Kaun Banega Crorepati on 7th of August, 9 p.m. India time. So that is gone now. And in the kind of piece, I'm looking at the piece in the media info line, and it's a byline to Madhushri Chakrabarti, 1st of August 2022. And they've got a picture of Amitabh Bachchan and another person whose name I'm not looking at in the caption, which is beyond the screen. But what she's saying, after 232 days, the nation's most loved knowledge-based reality game show Kaun Banega Crorepati, is back on Sony Entertainment Television. In its 14th season, KBC will rejoice 75 years of independence by celebrating the passion and pride of India. The special episode, which will air on Sunday, 7th of August at 9 p.m., will celebrate Azadi Ka Garb Ka Mahaparv in the presence of very illustrious guests which have made India proud. Now, this is like in the Mahaparvo is Todbobo, the Sanskrit kind of word. Mahaparvo, the big event, a big celebration. Hosted by megastar Mr. Amitabh Bachchan, the special episode will welcome the respected protectors of India, Major D.P. Singh, Kargil war veteran, and Colonel Mitali Madhumita Sena Medal gallantry, followed by the illustrious sports icon of India, M.C. Mary Kom, Padma Vibhushan, and Sunil Chetri, Padma Shri. And last but not the least, Bollywood's perfectionist and Padma Bhushan recipient Amir Khan. Bringing alive the pride and spirit of India, the special episode will commemorate with one of the 8 major forms of Indian classical dance, etc., etc. So these are the things that they're doing. It's a kind of showbiz to them. The showbiz is not the same thing as the actual celebration and the actual reality of the 75 years since India became independent and Pakistan became independent states in August 1947. In Bangladesh, the equation, if there were something happening, it would be completely different. It would be about Bangladesh becoming, quote, liberated from the Pakistan army or Pakistan. But whatever happens in Bangladesh is not obvious now as I present this program, but we'll be checking out and we should be commenting on later. The essential point is that the nearest the question is coming or getting to the 190 years over which the British Empire existed is being put by Tehreek-e-Insaf in Pakistan. Not because Tehreek-e-Insaf set out to do that, nor that Imran Khan set out to do that or plotted to do that or planned to do that. The point is that the events leading to Imran Khan's ouster from power, those events have forced this question, and it appears, of course, to be in the long distance, long context, it is something that has been more beneficial to democracy than any other ouster of any other prime minister in Pakistan would have been or had been. Because Imran Khan has become, to what extent he knew that or he expected that, consequence, he has become by far the most recognizable campaigner, political campaigner in the subcontinent. Well, not for 75 years, but for even longer. And none of the leaders, either in the context of Indian mythology, Nehru, M.K. Gandhi, most certainly didn't enjoy anything like that. And in the case of Pakistan, Muhammad Ali Jinnah didn't enjoy anything like that. Of course, the methodology, the mass movements that were taking place in the 1940s, before the August 1947 events, were by definition different. But in the case of Pakistan, it is very, very sharp. And it can be seen in the, I think I have seen about 7 or 8 songs that have been posted on the video online that are around the theme of the democracy movement, let's call it, fronted by Imran Khan and against the corrupt families of Zardari and Sharif. And of course, there are unnamed, unidentified, let's say, colluders within the government in the state of Pakistan. Now, it is absolutely inevitable that this momentum, this kind of or tempo that currently exists and has existed for at least a good 4 months, not necessarily 5 months, as I said yesterday, but good 4 months, it will abate, it will come to an end, but its impact, its actual depth of the dedication that the people are kind of making to the cause, I think it will continue, it will survive. And all the condemnation of Imran Khan by the financial crimes and the other outlets in the West, including the Guardian, those condemnations are not being made in the spirit of supporting Pakistan, let alone democracy in Pakistan, far less the Muslims of the subcontinent. Those condemnations by the Guardian, the financial crimes, are extensions of the propaganda issued by the UK government and the UK secret state. Because they don't want, what they do not want is a strong democratic or democratically strong Pakistan or democratically strong countries, essentially in the rest of the world. That is where imperialism comes in. Where there is no democracy, where there is no stability, there is no rule of law. That is the theme that Imran Khan has been driving. Where there is no rule of law, there is either fascism or imperialism or a mixture of both. And Imran Khan has been using the phrase rule of law, but he has not been using the words due process. Because due process and rule of law go hand in hand together. And he should be saying that these two are absolute fundamental essentials for a democratic state to prevail and exist. And he said that without rule of law, state will not be there, and the fair state will not be there, let's say. Democratic state will not be there, and there will be injustice, which is absolutely correct. And he, in the wider, longer context, he has been mentioning, in paraphrase or paraphrases, he has been mentioning the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, that if you don't have justice, equal justice available or accessible to the poorest as well as to the richest, then your society collapses. fragments, breaks up, breaks down. And this is something that none of the regimes that came to being in central Pakistan, let's say, either being kept in place by the military or kept in place by a mixture of the military and the supporters of dictatorship and lack of democracy or anti-democratic forces. These criminals did not want Pakistan to be a democratic state, a just state, which produced the crisis in relation to the disparities exploited by the likes of the Rahman Subhan and other ignorant morons that actually promise the wrong things. And Imran Khan is wrong, as I said, about Bangladesh making economically better progress than Pakistan. That is not the case. Of course, the same way Imran Khan has been praising the British institution, saying that because there is democracy, there is rule of law, so Boris Johnson is being ousted in a phased democratic way, kind of fair way. That's not the case at all. But again, these are minor aspects of weaknesses in his perception of the main thing. He has got his heart in the right place, of course, but if the people are dancing and jumping with joy and carrying the banners and the placards, as they have been doing on the main thoroughfares and the main streets of Pakistan, that can be only a very good thing. And also the end of the corruption, end of the corrupt hold that the military in Pakistan has. And the military in Pakistan has a less corrupt and less kind of mind-blowing, nightmarish hold than the counterparts army in Burma. In Burma, in the case of Burma, the hold the military has on the political state of the country is grimmer and stronger and more murderous than the situation that has obtained in Pakistan. For example, when the Rohingya Muslims were murdered, being massacred in Burma, I'm saying Burma because Burma is far more recognizable as a name than Myanmar. So when the Burmese army were massacring the Muslims of Rohingya state in Burma, they were committing those massacres and murders with the complicity of the likes of the Buddhist, substantial part of the Buddhist monks was kind of actively engaged in soliciting murder, massacre, rapes, and violence against the Muslims. And of course, Aung San Suu Kyi, the so-called heroine of the Western kind of promoters of Suu Kyi, who has been put back in the position of being a victim by the army after her spell as the leader, so-called. And as the leader, so-called, when she was paraded as the leader, she took part and was complicit with the military in murdering and massacring and ordering and denying the crimes that she had committed and she had been part of. She wasn't hiding her hostility to Muslims. She was not hiding her denial of the universal equal rights, human rights that the Muslims are being denied in Yangon or in other parts of Burma. She was quite brazenly lying and saying that some of the things that have been reported about her actual complicity and complicit behavior were simply not true. Well, that's a lie. Because even the limited video footage that has been seen against the scene of the Burmese military and paramilitary and gangs of thugs doing the massacres and rapes and crimes and burning the entire buildings and villages. Aung San Suu Kyi was aware of all of those things happening. And although there have not been any meaningful international calls on behalf of the Rohingya Muslims by any political movement in defense of them, the truth is that the Rohingyas themselves have realized and worked out, especially in a very big concentration like Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, that the Bangladesh government is not concerned about their welfare, their humanity, human rights. And it's not the Bangladesh government of Hasina. If Khalida Zia was there, she would have been doing the same thing. So go back to 1971 and look at the Bangladesh, the quote liberation war. All the claims by the supporters of Sheikh Hasina's cabal claiming that the Awami League liberated Bangladesh. That is an absolute wanton, brazen, untenable lie. For a start, Hasina herself was protected by the Pakistan army during the 9 months. Protected, fed, and much more. As was her father, who was in detention in Pakistan, but he was not punished or he was not tortured and he was not done anything. So the question is, if there was this liberation war and the Pakistani army was doing the things that Awami League said it was doing, of course it was doing a lot of serious things, but including genocide, we shall come to that again as an update. How is it that Sheikh Mujib was allowed to stay alive? Why did they not execute him? Because in international law, anyone who is seen to be doing a treasonous act, which is what calling for independence of one part of the country is in every country's constitution. How is it that he was not executed? I'm not saying he should have been. I would be the last one to support his execution, even when he was eventually murdered in August 1975 in Dhaka by some Bangladeshis. And there was a man called Abu who claimed in the Jung newspaper in London that he was part of the organization behind the mass murders of Sheikh Mujib and most of his family. I nearly had a physical confrontation with that man. And I'm still absolutely opposed to the fact that Sheikh Mujib was murdered, as I am opposed to the fact that Ziaur Rahman was murdered. Why? Because the biggest political crime in terms of committed against your enemies or your opponents is to want them to be silent instead of being alive and safe and engaged in exchange of evidence-based arguments. Why? Because without the evidence or without having the access to the evidence of every aspect of the behavior, the actual owners of independence, the ordinary people, stand no chance of getting any benefit of the independence and freedom, which is what is happening in Bangladesh. For example, I'm very well used or well familiar with the streets of Dhaka and the streets of kind of streets near the courts, where there are on the streets there are people doing all kinds of legal trade. I mean, the street stalls, all kinds of legal work is done. And in a country with hundreds of millions of people, there is hardly any access to the vast majority of the people needing full and fair access to the legal services of the state, but they haven't got anything. So the most victims of crimes, most victims of illegalities and wrongdoings, contract, tort, crime, fraud, etc., suffer their losses without any remedies. That is the biggest proof of absence of liberation of freedom. And as the Prophet, peace be on him, said, the richest ones are having the access and the poorest are not. And the country, the society is therefore descending. Now, those who support the likes of the Sheikh Hasina regime, they of course think that Sheikh Hasina will stay in power for much longer than she will. And the thing that she has got a kind of undeniable license, almost from deity, from God, that she owns the independence movement of Bangladesh, because her father was murdered by enemies of independence. Now, that is something that is yet to be decided as to who really murdered Sheikh Mujib. Of course, people have been named and some people have been hanged and etc., but there are so many other issues that have remained unexamined evidentially as to what were the actual deciding kind of motivations for murdering Sheikh Mujib. Now, Sheikh Mujib wasn't murdered by one person or one kind of faction. He was murdered by a number of factions which, I mean, circumstantially came together for various different purposes, and they together came to annihilate him, which they shouldn't have done. It should never have happened. And the fact that Sheikh Hasina and the beneficiaries of the extended Sheikh family that have been doing absolutely obscene business by selling the idea that Sheikh Mujib was murdered because he was a saint. Those people who have been doing that will pay for it in political losses, because when they're eventually out of power, all their exaggerated claims and all their exaggerated kind of assertions against their political careerist opponents or rivals will be exposed for the lies and the crimes that they are and they have been. For example, in the University of Dhaka, the biggest academic fraud committed in the run-up to the 71 events, let's say, were committed by the likes of Rahman Subhan. Now, notice the spelling of the name Rahman. Rahman is a satanic kind of spelling. It's not Rahman, it's Rahman. And this idiot was elevated, his image was elevated to the point of unbelievable height. He didn't even do his degree at Cambridge. He was there for triples, but he didn't do it. Now, quite apart from the fact that those degrees are of secondary importance. So, the actual thesis that he produced, Rahman Subhan, was completely dishonest about the economy. And it has never been challenged because, as I have been saying, those in Bangladesh who claim to be concerned about independence and the real test of independence as seen from the ordinary people's standpoint, they don't exist. These people don't simply exist. I mean, the nearest that came to such a person was the founder of the weekly holiday called Anayatullah Khan. Now, Anayatullah Khan and I had a big row at the Dhaka Press Club in 1970 because I was reading a newspaper, English newspaper, which wasn't available in the newsagents on the streets of Dhaka because it was a foreign, international Western newspaper. And instead of taking on the arguments I had made against him to his face about some other things that he had done wrong, Anayatullah Khan said that my reading the paper from a Western country showed that I was not really concerned about supporting the local journalists or local journalism or local whatever. This is like the news agents telling me, the news agent the news agent or the shopkeeper who stocked newspapers saying that my buying the Jung newspaper showed that I was not a patriot, that I was in fact loyal to Pakistan. Now, that means that if you like the Indian spies have got an organization called the Research and Analysis Wing, RAW. They not only read the Jung newspaper, they read everything else. It is nothing to do with loyalty. It is to get the evidence. So the depth of stupidity and idiocy that Anayatullah Khan showed by criticizing me, quote, criticizing me, by saying that my reading the English newspaper, either an English one and an American one, showed that I was not seriously dedicated to the local people, showed the absurdity and the idiocy. Because he was 1,000 times more loyal to the Americans and the British than I ever would be. I never was, I never am. I am dedicated to the objective evidence, and the objectivity test is the what universally survives all the pretensions and all the careers and opportunities. So I mentioned Anayatullah Khan because he was rated as one of the most intelligent ones in Dhaka among the intellectuals. Fine, I have no question about or quarrel about him being described as such. Him or any of his brothers. There are so many Khans that have been in positions of some influence politically. Point is, the test is on what issue about Bangladesh's independence did Anayatullah Khan actually sacrifice any of his benefits? Because he would only sacrifice or he would be risking losing or sacrificing his career's benefits if he took on the regime or the government on an issue of selling out the country to for an interest, like currently happening in Pakistan, when the main slogan, the driving slogan is that imported government is namanzoor. That was Anayatullah Khan made kind of pretend, kind of tickling questions about the Bangladesh, post 1971 Bangladesh, and its relationship with India. But he was fake. He was absolutely bogus. Because he actually got upset with me because The previous night, I had been attending one of the press events at the Intercontinental Hotel just to get the information, not to take part in the boozing and whatever that went on. And I saw Enatullah Khan drinking as usual, and these servants of the West were kind of walking around, giving out the fragrance of the Western boat fragrance. It didn't feel like the atmosphere of a country like Bangladesh, which has been just about to be created, let's say. It wasn't declared as such, but there was a tension in January 1970 that actually gave every sign that there would be confrontation. That's one thing, but as I said yesterday, constitutionally, strictly constitutionally, there was no declaration of war. Anyway, so I said to Enatullah Khan that a socialist or a pretend socialist democrat person, I mean, have you no sense of shame that you pretend, continuously pretend to be one of the Westerners? Like that film, the character played by Punit Rajkumar in a South Indian film, which has been dubbed and called Zindadil or Zindadili. I mean, that script was stupid, but I mean, some of it is, I mean, some of it contains some little bits of intelligence. And when Punit Rajkumar was challenged by the actress, well, by the girl that he fancied and who rejected him, he started by coming across as being kind of contradictory in everything he said to people because he didn't have the cash. But he had the cash if he wanted to, but he didn't have the cash. He wasn't carrying the cash because he took everything out of his pocket and threw them as he was storming out of the meeting with his main manager and his daughter, whom he fancied and who rejected him. He was offering people inordinate amounts of money for just a single meal. So he went to the restaurant owned by one of the characters that plays co-stars that has appeared in many of the films with him, and said that he would pay him 50,000 rupees for something that didn't actually cost 50,000 rupees, etc. And then this man said, "Where have you come from?" And then he called two of his employees. And Punit Rajkumar character was speaking in a kind of foreign cultural accent rather than in language. And one of those said to his boss that this man, that is Punit Rajkumar, is Ada Angrez, is half English. So Ada Angrez is exactly what Enatullah Khan was. And Ada Angrez or quarter Angrez are the absolute overwhelming majority of the Bangladesh bureaucracy. And that's where the problem is. When in 1991, I was trying to organize this Bangladesh 2001 program to create sustainable, long-term answers and solutions to the water-related disasters, I had to contact the Bangladesh diplomatic kind of places, mainly in New York, because of the United Nations being based there, and in Geneva, where the main activities of the United Nations in humanitarian kind of fields take place. So whenever I spoke to the Bangladesh missions in Bengali, they actually ignored what I was saying on my calls. And then I thought, well, now let's try to speak to them in English. So I did try to call them a few times more, but I didn't continue speaking Bengali. I spoke to them in English. For a weird reason, I got some response. Not that I got the correct response, but I got the response in that they were addressing me. These very same people, are similar kind of place people, were addressing me as if I was almost not other Angres, but I was fully Angres. And they were addressing me with some kind of respect, not because of who I am or I was, because they didn't know who I was, but the fact that I was speaking in English, and they detected that the English was almost like the full English. And that shows the severity of the brainwashed masses in the ranks of the government. So where is the cherished claim that they say they have given the place of national language status to Bengali? They haven't. What they have done, and they're still doing in 2022, is that they are selling every single morsel. They're kind of milking every single concept related to, quote, freedom or liberation for the very wrong reasons, without respecting the tradition, practicing the values, upholding the principles. And I saw when I was, remember, I'm the journalist that didn't get paid for my journalism. Why is that? The question for those who haven't heard me discuss this is this: if I got paid from the owners of the papers that I wrote in, then I would be having to obey their particular line. And I had no intention of following the owner's agenda on anything. So much so that I went to a point where I was, in the newsroom, you got so many phone calls. And one of the phone calls that I received asked me about the personal family matters of a politician that was connected with the ownership of the newspaper. So I answered, I said, this is nothing to do with that person. This is a news kind of office. And the answer from that person was that this is owned by those people. I said, he doesn't own me and never will, nor will you. And I said that I'm not going to get involved in the issues of his wife's periods. You can get lost. So this actually reached the editor and the others, and the editor called me. I said, you can get lost. I don't work for you. I work for me. Now, there is no way that I could have responded in that way if I were receiving money, because I'm dependent and were dependent on their money. Same thing happened with another newspaper. So we have to do something about media and journalism and freedom of expression I'm coming to Imran Khan talking about the freedom of expression in a minute. Why is it that journalists themselves claim, I mean, paid journalists, of course, themselves claim to be the couriers of freedom of thought and freedom of speech, and that they don't actually uphold the freedom of speech of most campaigners whose news they suppress. I've been a journalist, and I'm a journalist, and also a campaigner. In which capacity I've seen more action of so-called journalists suppressing news about big campaigns by saying that we wouldn't be able to publish this and keep our jobs, so they go to their jobs. So there has to be a way in quote journalism where the journalism is done regardless of the payment or salary or income or whatever. So there has to be a guaranteed basic kind of supporting package for the journalists, and there should not be expected in any way to follow a kind of agenda of the owners, and the ownership model should be removed, I think. There was one in the course of the first one, the newspaper, national newspaper, there was a photographer who was, of course, paid. Well, everyone else was paid except me. Well, everyone else worked because of payment, and I didn't work because of payment, whatever. So this photographer thought that his photographic skills were equal to my journalistic instincts about an event, the same event. So when we happened to be present during a, let's say, physical scuffle between two groups of people in Dhaka, let's say, where political events often had scuffles and whatever. It wasn't the scuffles that was rare, it was the actual moment where the ferocity on the face of one far exceeded the ferocity on the face of his rival. And I anticipated that. And I said to the photographer, I was not standing far from him, I said, just snap it, just press the thing. And he didn't press the actual button, whatever, of the camera. Back in the office, he had a big row with me, saying that I was dictating and interfering with his professionalism. I said, not a chance, I wasn't. I was trying to acquire the best moment, and you failed. I wasn't intruding into your professional contract or whatever, and I wasn't going to demand credit for the picture. All I wanted was that ferocity in the face of the one of the kind of rivals. Now, this could be translated many times. So, journalism in Pakistan, I'm talking about up to December 1970. Journalism was not what it should have been. And what's his name? Anatullah Khan was not a radical journalist that his biographers and his wiki entries say he was. There is nobody in Dhaka that was active in the period, let's say even in 1970, that was doing any original journalism. And there hasn't been anyone who has been doing any original journalism in the last 51 years. So I know all of that. And based on all of that, I said that Rawla Khalaf, the editor of the Financial Crimes, has done a disservice about Nazanin Zacharie Ratcliffe, because there are these points that should have been made. I mean, Nazanin, we don't know, I don't know her, but from all accounts, she comes across as a very decent, balanced individual. And the fact that she was treated to this kind of ordeal should be examined more about how that happened. Of course, it has been sold as the bad behavior on the part of the Iranians, but it isn't. It's the result of the bad behavior, racist behavior on the part of the Boris Johnson fronted UK government foreign office, foreign department. Because there was, as has been admitted now, not in this piece as such, but extensively admitted that Johnson was following an agenda by the UK Foreign Office rather than showing concern about safety and welfare of a British citizen. And the agenda was to keep the Iranians waiting for the 400 million pounds that they were owed, and the British government refused to pay them. Think about that. When did that become the headline in The Guardian even? It didn't. It never did. It did begin to come only towards the end of her ordeal. But it should have been investigated by The Guardian. It should have been investigated by the so-called opposition members of parliament. To what extent did her local MP did that investigation, and to what effect? I shall investigate that, not in this particular edition, because I have not carried out the necessary factual investigation as to the role really played by the constituency MP for the area where Nazanin Zachary Ratcliffe has been a resident, constituent elector and member of the family. Because the role of a member of parliament in the fables, in the mythology that is spread about the powerful member of parliament post, includes the claim that an MP can do the impossible. MP can do anything. When I was talking about the role played by Stonehouse yesterday, I wasn't able to conclude because the person I was speaking to did not appear to be on the same kind of level of awareness about the particular aspect. They talked about Peter Shore and Ian Mikado. That was not what this was about. Mikado and Peter Shore, both of them Tower Hamlets MPs, were Bangladeshis, or then East Pakistanis were the dominant kind of constituents. Neither Peter Shore nor Ian Mikado in 1971 or after 71, in 72, was accused of the kind of theft and crime that John Stonehouse was accused of. That was the point. That was the difference. And in any case, Stonehouse was not a constituency MP of the Bangladeshis in London. His constituency in Birmingham, in the Midlands, didn't have anything like the huge numbers in terms of proportion of Bangladeshis, potential supporters of Bangladesh in 71, that existed in both constituencies in Tower Hamlets. So Stonehouse became involved in the events of Bangladesh for a completely different reason than the involvement of Peter Shore and Ian Mikado were. Because Ian Mikado was, compared to Peter Shore, Ian Mikado was a member of the Labour left grouping, and Peter Shore was, of course, a right-winger. But the two had common between them a very servile group of quote Bengalis who would go and worship them. So it wasn't like Peter Shore or Ian Mikado fighting heroically for the cause of Bangladesh. They weren't. They were being worshipped by this gang of very inadequate kind of Bengalis that didn't think that their constituency MPs had the duty to support their kind of cause. And there are photographs. I mean, these individuals were doing what selfies later became kind of notorious for. They are beaming with these Shore and Mikado, not necessarily always together, but mainly Shore, Peter Shore. And Peter Shore was an imperialist racist who felt that the moments like the gatherings, often many of them took place in Toynbee, where the homosexual little empire of Donald Chesworth was operated as well on the side. So these people were there gathering under the pretext of fighting for the cause of Bangladesh, but actually they were doing all kinds of other things. But one thing that they weren't doing, I mean, Peter Shore most certainly wasn't accused by anyone that I have spoken to of being personally interested in the money, nor was Ian Mikado, what I cannot be absolutely 100% certain about, because physically I wasn't present there. But despite the difference of the 5,000 miles, I knew that Stonehouse was not supporter of Bangladesh. He was a supporter of a particular business proposition. And that business proposition was not just his idea. That business proposition was, encouraged by others, including a number of Bangladeshis. His daughter, Julia Stonehouse, was named in detail. So these are Bangladeshi Silotis. And both in his original writing, the first book that Stonehouse wrote was The Death of an Idealist. And afterwards, Stonehouse was full of regret. Stonehouse regretted the fact that he ever came across some of the most dishonest individuals among the Bengalis that approached him. And he was ashamed that he let them do that to him. Let's put it this way. Stonehouse was an established member of parliament. And his interest was in money, no doubt about that. But his interest in money was not like life-threatening. He was not going to die if he didn't do a Bangladeshi, kind of British Bangladeshi bank kind of thing. But there were scores of Bangladeshis, the Bengalis, that wanted to exploit John Stonehouse's softness, if you like, for Bangladesh cause and make themselves money. Now, if I were able to discuss this further yesterday, I would have gone on to say to Kutub, who was on the program, that during the course of Bangladesh in 71, my father, who was based in New Road in Stepney, my father was by far one of the most successful organizers of the fundraising and social awareness for Bangladesh. But my father wasn't a politician, so he didn't pursue a political career. And he didn't encourage any of his relations to say that he was. He did it for the love of his country and his people. So, but he was very successful. He raised, I don't know how much he raised, but he raised significant amounts of money. And he gave people solid support, because my father's address was a regular center of gatherings every single day. Now, the people who did benefit from their involvement in raising funds in the name of Bangladesh went on to open restaurants. Now, what Qutub, I had no idea about Qutub's knowledge about that, so I couldn't say, and I cannot say now. But what needs to be put on the record is this: that these people who about about 20 people were known quite openly in the community in Brick Lane, that these are the ones that actually stole money. Part of the money that they used to open the restaurants was money that they took from the Bangladesh Fund. Now, that money was not meant for personal use. That money was meant for 100% being given to the cause of helping Bangladesh. So there is a difference. And these people have been allowed to go kind of, if you like, not held to account. They were being discussed up to the point of John Stonehouse's kind of being in Miami, caught in Australia, and this subsequent return to England and his trial. While all of that was going on, these criminals among the Bangladeshis in East London, let's say, they were being mentioned as well. I'm not going to name them now, because if I name them, I'd name them based on the what is called the hearsay, because I didn't actually witness their theft and whatever. I only took part in discussions that were led by other people that were present in 1971, and they named them in detail, and they actually gave the evidence. So these criminals had restaurants, successful ones, and that until the fundraising opportunity for in the name of Bangladesh in 71, they didn't have any kind of demonstrable source of income to that extent. That is the point. So where did they get the money? What was the source of their money? For example, in the Greater London Council's grants program, many years later, when Ken Livingstone produced this scheme for paying grants, making grants available to various groups, including, quote, ethnicity-based ones. Some of the grants money that came to Tower Hamlets under those art scheme, cultural scheme, was stolen and put into business. It's not something I'm saying. It is on the record in the various claims in court, in the county court, Central London County Court, and other documents that show the detailed kind of sources of money behind the opening of business, restaurant business, by individuals that pretended to be applicants for cultural programs or whatever from the GLC. And when they got the money, they stole the money, diverted it completely or mostly or substantially, and opened businesses. These are real events that happened. And I had a physical fight on the first floor of the County Hall in London in the period, I think, the period between 1985, 87, that kind of time. But it was the period when, and this criminal, who was the chair of the arts committee of the GLC, he was not listening to me when I said that, are you checking on these applications? And he completely lost his cool, lost it. And he threatened violence. I said, well, let's have it then, We didn't we didn't make physical contact, but we nearly did. Why did I have to do that? Why would he think that I was in the wrong? For simply asking him that public money should not be made available under a slogan for the public money to be abused by crooks who were actually playing the system while the actual cause was being lost or suppressed. So that is the sickness inherent in the grants business, if you like. And the sickness is traceable to Ken Livingstone himself. Because Ken Livingstone's purpose was to entice the lowest common denominator, to put it in the language of that program that was presented by Anne, the weakest link. Anne Robinson may not have coined it, but that is what happened. The most corrupt in the community concerned would be the most eager to make the most kind of persistent effort to grab hold of the money, thus robbing the rest of the community of the opportunity or the benefit of the actual program that the grant was supposed to serve. And that is what happened in the Ken Livingstone's thing. And that is what had happened on the side during 1971 when the Bangladesh Fund was robbed. The first officially kind of appointed High Commissioner for Bangladesh in London, after the December surrender of the Pakistan army to the Indians, was accused of complicity with these particular crooks. And there were, Julia Stonehouse in her book goes through all these, some of the key things she goes through quite meticulously. And these people include the people who Stonehouse thought that these people had an agenda against him. Stonehouse was wrong because the what's his name? Reverend Michael something. This man was a Christian churchman, clergyman. He had no agenda against Stonehouse. He had no agenda against Stonehouse, nor did Fazlul Haq. Fazlul Haq was a barrister from Barishal. He and this reverend they worked closely in investigating the theft of the money. And they were among the investigators. They were not the only ones. And they found various links and they corroborated the evidence successfully. And it was established that the money funds raised by various people as Bangladesh Liberation Fund, Support Fund, was stolen. Not all of it, but it was stolen significantly. And that was the Reverend Michael something, and then there was Fazlul Haq. But on the other side were the Bengali crooks and criminals who wanted to rob Stonehouse himself. And Donald Chesworth was mentioned as a close friend of Stonehouse during 1971. Chesworth, whom I met only about 2 occasions, I think, Chesworth was not involved, well, interested as much, principally in looting money. He was involved in making friends with young Bengali man. That I found out, and one of the young Bengali men that Chesworth had a very successful friendship with stayed in Toynbee Hall, where Chesworth was a warden. For no rent, he didn't pay any rent, etc., for several years. And that is the one that actually told me about Chesworth. I wasn't querying about his whatever sexual relationships, but that one kind of volunteered a lot of information about Chesworth. So when the Bangladeshi community was robbed, and some of the people were robbed, and it didn't actually enhance the reputation of the rest of the community, which was not dishonest and corrupt. For example, when the meeting that George Galloway held in one of the restaurants that Ajmal Hussain still kind of owned, the restaurant, not the actual freehold, in April 2006. And he made a statement which I filmed and I otherwise recorded in front, by putting a tape recorder in front of me. There were other people recording it as well. So George Galloway, that was the second year since he became an MP, 2006, held a booklet or something, a pamphlet, and called Michael Crook, the Michael Crook. Now this is my name for Michael Crook, not George Galloway's. But George Galloway has stolen other names that I have assigned to people based on their behavior. But George Galloway does that. He even stole the whole constituency. He said that it was him that conquered the Bethnal Green thing, not the Bangladeshi community, the voters. So Galloway has a history of stealing entire constituencies. So what happened? He said, Galloway, 8th or 9th or 10th of April 2006, we can check that Tower Hamlets was the most corrupt local council that he, Galloway, had come across in 30 years of life in politics. That is what Galloway said. And in the context of the KHOODEELAAR campaign, we could only accept that. We were not going to reject that. We welcome that in effect. What we could not anticipate was that Galloway was being corrupt as well in that kind of statement. Why? Because Galloway then went on to align himself, however he did that is immaterial, with a gang that eventually produced the elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. And Galloway became their instrument. Galloway became the instrument in coming across as the poster boy for the petition for having an elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. Ordinary people in Tower Hamlets had no interest in that at all. Even now, this is now 12 years, 13 years since 2009 and the launch of the corrupt campaign for having a corrupt mayor. You cannot find in Tower Hamlets, in one place, even 2 persons in the Bangladeshi community that would have the necessary breadth of knowledge about the council, necessary familiarity with the various linkages among the council's positions and posts and bureaucracy. And you won't find anyone who is committed in any significant way to eradicating corruption from the Tower Hamlets Council. Now, Galloway became the poster boy, as I said, of the 2009 campaign for elected mayor. Eventually, they got the people to support so-called referendum. And the referendum gave the yes to having the mayor, and the mayor duly was created, and in October 2010 the mayor post was filled. And everyone who is familiar with Tower Hamlets Council and the mayor system by now knows what a disaster it has been, what a calamity it has been, what a crime it has been. And what has happened throughout the whole period of October 2010 until the end of April, just before the May 2014 election, end of April 2014, when Lutfur Rahman was incumbent in the post of mayor, elected mayor, George Galloway absolutely remained silent about the literally dozens and dozens and dozens of incidents of corruption, abuse, unfitness, stupidity, immorality that are publicly publicized against Lutfur Rahman. And what happened was that by the time the election took place, so-called, of the May 2014 for the mayor re-election and the councillors election, Galloway maintained a strange but very concerning silence, because one of the drinking partners of Galloway's racist kind of advisor, so-called, who benefited from the generosity, the cynical generosity of Azmal Hussain, who fed them lots and lots and lots and lots of milk. One of the drinking partners, not necessarily in Azmal Hussain's place, but elsewhere, of George Galloway's kind of gang was Ted Jory. And Ted Jory has gone on the record as saying that he spent years as a chum or as a kind of mate of these gang. Now, none of them said one single word in public about the fact that Lutfur Rahman was presiding over, was in post, making decisions that invariably affected the handing of public money to crooks, or the handing of public money related benefits to criminals. Now, when the BBC's Newsnight broadcast on the 19th of May 2022 the item about Lutfur Rahman's Aspire party getting elected in Tower Hamlets Council, to the Tower Hamlets Council, and Lutfur Rahman himself getting elected despite being out of the post for whatever number of years. When the Newsnight program broadcast that, it left out the main issue, because David Grossman came across as grossly stupid and grossly ignorant. Not that he was stupid or ignorant about correctly quoting the election commissioner Mori, Richard Morey denouncing Boris Johnson as dishonest. Because Lutfur Rahman was being denounced by Richard Morey as dishonest. Richard Morey said that Lutfur Rahman was dishonest based on Lutfur Rahman's response to the proceedings, or Lutfur Rahman's statements or stance during the proceedings in the case against him of the petition brought against him by the 4 signatories. And he said that he was dishonest. And he also said, Richard Morey, that Alibur Chaudhry was dishonest as well. And there was absolutely no comment. There has been, to this day, no fact-based, evidentially supportable comment by George Galloway that Morey was factually wrong or that Morey was legally wrong. Morey was factually right and legally right. Where Morey was wrong, did not matter in the full context of the petition. Because the people that Morey cited, Morey cited a wide range of people that had appeared before him in giving evidence against Lutfur Rahman. So Morey actually cited a lot of people that he cited credibly. He made a mistake in coming across as a racist, prejudiced in favor of John Biggs. But that would not disqualify Morris. That would not count as Morris being legally wrong. Think about that. Because you can only successfully make an appeal or judicial review or whatever against Morris role if he got the law wrong, but he didn't. So what happened was that Morey got the law right, but he got his attitude wrong. The fact that he was biased does not mean that his getting it legally right invalidates his ruling. How do I know? Because following the ruling on the 23rd of April 2015, Lutfur Rahman, as the applicant, made about 5 or 6 applications to the High Court under one excuse or another, seeking to have the Morey ruling overturned or a judicial review being granted, and he was not granted a judicial review, and he was not able to have any of the Morey substantive Morey judgments declared wrong. He could not get any of that in any of the applications. So what happens? If he didn't succeed in overturning Morey legally, and only legally could he overturn any of it. He could not do it by restaging the actual hearing. That is not how the system operates. I don't say works, but that's not how the system operates in England. You have to have an appeal based on evidence that the law was not followed or the decision was illegal. That is again a legal question. And so, therefore, when somebody says that Lutfur Rahman claimed to have lost everything and that the Labour Party got it wrong by allowing Lutfur Rahman to come back in, or etc., etc., they are confusing two things. The fact that Lutfur Rahman got in is nothing to do with the fact that Lutfur Rahman is innocent. Lutfur Rahman got in on the 5th of May 2022 because in the electorate in Tower Hamlets, among the Bangladeshis, there is no awareness. There is no awareness of moral outrage. Most Bangladeshis in Tower Hamlets, in the electorates, the two electorates, most people voting, whatever way they voted, in Tower Hamlets on the 5th of May 2022, were not bothered about the niceties of the law. It's an emotional thing and also a spiritual direction. I mean, they updated Shamsul Haq's stance. And instead of Shamsul Haq saying that they had a duty, spiritual duty, as Muslims to vote for Lutfur Rahman, they effectively got the same result by making some other false statements and staying within the bounds of the law, which is how the actual result was obtained. We have got 12 minutes to, what time is it? 12 minutes to 2 hours. And this is the time, is it? 23:04 GMT and 4 minutes after midnight on Monday, this 8th of August 2022. Now, Tower Hamlets, therefore, is the latest kind of scandal that has been the main feature of the Bangladeshi political behavior in this country, that is covered in corruption, disrespect for democracy, dishonesty, dysfunction. The previous big event was, of course, in 1971 when about 10 Bangladeshi fundraisers stole the money that was allegedly claimed for the Bangladesh cause. Now, those criminals have got away without being held to justice, held to account. And Lutfur Rahman's cabal have still so far not been held to account. The signal is these events are giving is very, very bad signal. The message they are giving, very, very bad. Because you will not, like in the USA, you have this kind of case that has become notorious, although the case has nothing to do with the corruption in that way. But the abortion case, this Supreme Court has overturned the particular ruling has become undeniable. So when the Sharif family and the Zardari family are called names and described as criminals in Pakistan in a way that would never have happened had the kind of Pakistani establishment not removed Imran Khan from office. Compare Imran Khan with Lutfur Rahman, completely opposite situation. Imran Khan was ousted from office, but his being ousted from office has been followed by his becoming the champion for democracy, champion for ethics, morality, and champion that is actually talking about the manifesto spelled out by the Prophet of Islam. And Imran Khan has been gaining a political profile that has never been attached to any Pakistani politician. In fact, no politician in the subcontinent has been given this kind of wide popular recognition that Imran Khan has been getting in Pakistan already. Of course, he mentions Tipu Sultan and his traitor, as well as he mentioning the Nawab Sirajuddaulah and his traitor Mir Zafar. Now, these two people, Sirajuddaulah and Tipu Sultan, I mean, they defended huge parts of the subcontinent against the conspiring, crooked, imperialist East India Company. And although Tipu Sultan died in his 40s, I think, Tipu Sultan remains, although the South Indian films are yet to recognize him, which is part of the reason why I started the contextual references, examining the scripts and the contents of the dialogue of the South Indian films. Although they haven't done that, Tipu Sultan remains one of the most courageous champions of the people against the oppressive imperialists that the subcontinent has seen over 1,000 years. Now, how much money did Tipu Sultan have access to? Not a lot, I don't think. And yet here in Tower Hamlets, Lutfur Rahman had access to more than £1 billion. And what did he do with the money, or the access to the money? Lutfur Rahman did in Tower Hamlets what George Galloway condemned Michael Crook for doing in 2006. Think about that. It's the same George Galloway who can be used as the kind of divider, the kind of separator of the bad and the good. Until Galloway surfaces in the Water Lily Center on the 12th of November 2014 and confesses in effect that he is brazen enough to tell lies and claim all kinds of things because he is a crook. He made a corrupt series of statements. On the 12th of November 2014, not only did Galloway endorse the corrupt career and corrupt behavior of Lutfur Rahman, he condemned Richard Morley for attacking democracy, as did Ken Langston Livingston at the same event. Mori was not attacking democracy. Mori was a bureaucrat, is an election commissioner, is a bureaucrat who was given an application that as the appointed election commissioner, Mori had a duty to carry out the examination of the petition. It wasn't something that Mori encouraged or could encourage, but that is what he did. So to call him a racist because of that was, of course, wrong and unfounded. And to call him a supporter of fascism or an opponent of elected democracy is absolutely unfounded. Because Mori wasn't challenging election. Mori was trying to preserve or uphold the qualities of keeping the integrity of the election process. And all the criticism that Lutfur's apologists have made of Mori, those have not concealed or hidden the fact that everything Mori said stands. And Lutfur Rahman has been unable to prove in court that anything Mori has said was wrong. Anything substantial that Mori has said against Lutfur Rahman is wrong. We covered quite a few things tonight, and the main theme is that there has to be integrity. There has to be delivery of the promised goods. If they said that the elected mayor post was going to be this, that, and the other, delivering goods to the people, then 12 years on, there has not been any delivery. Because whatever the Tower Hamlets Council is doing, by way of collecting the council tax and doing other things, is not the product of there being a post called mayor, or that there is a post holder called the mayor. These are the things that are basic things that a council has to do. And the name of the council leader or the name of the council mayor will make no difference to the issues, because those are nationally applicable guidelines and rules and regulations. I mean, after the 5th of May 2022, the various people that have been publishing, as I've listed before, about Tower Hamlets Council, about Tower Hamlets Council's kind of structure now, the Labour Party, which was the main party, becoming the minority party now on the council. That is something that deserves to be truthfully examined. Now, nobody has done that truthful examination at all. Why? Because all these left-wing so-called writers and commentators that have actually celebrated Lutfur Rahman's Aspire Party's result of 5th of May 2022, they've done that opportunistically, and they've done that racistly, corruptly, patronizingly. Racistly corrupting and patronizing is a collective way of saying that they have not expected, these racists have not shown that they have expected the highest possible standard from Lutfur Rahman. They think that they can just let it pass, and that's wrong. That shows that there is a standard below the level of the standard that applies to everyone else. When it comes to the standard that is acceptable from somebody like Lutfur Rahman, coming from a Bangladeshi background, that he should be excused. That is the racist aggravation of the situation. And it does not produce good leaders. It does not produce accountable leaders. So that's what we have been missing. And we must be working to uphold, establish. We shall be talking about housing allocation. We shall be talking about the Channel 4 role in corruption in Tower Hamlets Council. And we shall be talking about much more that the times at present doesn't allow us to do, which is midnight 17 hours GMT. Sorry, midnight, not midnight 17, it's the midnight 17 UK time on Monday, the 8th of August 2022, and it's 23:17 hours GMT on Sunday 2022. So at this stage, we say goodbye to everyone watching, and until the next time. This is 2 hours and 2 minutes, at which point we conclude this particular broadcast.